Yep, this video is late. I took a bit of a break. My husband and I recently became debt-free in the month of August, so we have been celebrating. It's been a long 4 years, but it's such a huge accomplishment for ourselves. So yeah, I took a little bit of a break, but I'm so excited to be back. I've got quite a few books to talk about that I read in August. I did have 4 DNFs, so of course we're going to start from those and then go from my least favorite to my favorite book of August. So the first book that I DNF'd in August was Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is a horror book. I was super excited to read. It was on my most anticipated books of 2022. The cover is super creepy. It centers around a woman that is returning home to her childhood home where her father was actually a serial killer. Her mother has called her home to basically take care of her, wrap things up in the house as she is dying. And initially, I really enjoyed it. The writing was very, very atmospheric. It was creepy. And then it started getting super boring. It was taking a long time to get to the point. I wanted like the juiciness of the serial killer and what her dad did. But Sarah Gailey was doing a lot of extra with her writing that was kind of just getting boring to me and weird. So I DNF'd it. So Just Like Home has a 3.5 rating with about just over 5,000 ratings on Goodreads. So some people liked it. I unfortunately did not enjoy it at all. And I did cheat and read like spoilers for the ending, and I'm very happy that I did not finish this book because I would have been really irritated with the ending. The next book that I DNF'd was by Sandra Brown. This is my first book by her. It's called Overkill. And this was a NetGalley arc, and unfortunately I could not finish it. I've seen this author's name like all over the place, but I just have never read her books, and it was a thriller. And the premise is about this football like star quarterback who's retired, and his ex-wife, who seemed to be pretty promiscuous, was at this party, and these group of men took advantage of her, or there was drugs involved. I'm not sure exactly what happened because I didn't get to that part, but she somehow ends up in a coma, and her ex-husband, the main character in this book, has power of attorney over her health once she's in a coma, and he decides to kind of let her family take care of that, so they've kept her on life support. So a state prosecutor has come to him about 4 years later to ask him to take back his power of attorney rights, or take advantage of his power of attorney rights, and discontinue life support on her, so that the person that was responsible for her condition, who was recently also released from jail, can be tried for murder instead of whatever he was initially tried for. And I thought that premise sounded cool. I was like, oh, this sounds like a great thriller. And I started reading it, and it had like immediate insta-love between the main character quarterback, and the state's prosecutor. It was like cringy. The guy that got away with putting this woman into a coma was like, he was just so corny, like your typical like rich boy, I'm gonna get away with basically murder, do whatever I want. As soon as he got out of jail, he just wanted to drive his like his fast fancy car and get drunk and snort coke. It was just not the kind of thriller that I enjoy, and so I couldn't finish it. So no. But on Goodreads, it has a 4.16 rating with just over 4,500 reviews, so apparently a lot of people liked it. I did not. The next book that I DNF'd was called The Roughest Draft by Emily Wimberly and Austin Siegmund Broca, and this is a romance book. It is about 2 authors who have written this like amazing best-selling book, and something happens during this writing process and they part ways, and it's been a couple years, and the female lead, I think she's married to like her publicist, or he was her publicist, but she no longer wants to write because of whatever happened during their writing process. And then the male lead, he still wants to write, but the books that he's putting out aren't, I guess, all that great. So their publicists are trying to get them back together to write again because they do have one more book in their contract. And I saw a lot of good reviews about this book, that it was kind of compared to Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and it was just centered on their romance, whereas Emily Henry's book kind of had that side story about the sisters. So I was excited. I don't think I was more than 20 pages in, and the male lead made some kind of comment about how he and this author, the female lead, I can't remember their names, I'm sorry, but they were off on like some writing sabbatical to get this book written, and I'm assuming feelings and something happened between them, but he was married, and he said something like, yeah, I was basically faking loving my wife, and no. I can't do infidelity in books. I have no desire to read about that. I don't know what direction this book went into. I don't know if that's not what happened. I'm assuming it is, but immediately I was turned off, so DNF for me. And the roughest draft on Goodreads has 3.67 star rating with 25,000 reviews, so I don't know. People liked it. I didn't. And it might actually be a good book. Actually, I was enjoying the writing. It starts off, the female characters like in a bookstore roaming around. It was great. The writing was wonderful. The content, I just didn't think that I would enjoy. So I would definitely try another book by these authors, but just not this one. That I DNF'd was called Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I was super excited to read this. This is a book that takes place in the Regency era. I used to read a lot of historical romance books, and this one has a bit of fantasy in it, where the main character has half of her soul taken by a fairy. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Regency, a little bit of historical romance in it with some fantasy, and it was unbelievably boring. I actually got about halfway through this book. It's not that long. I think it's just over 200 pages, but I couldn't do it. The Regency part of this book didn't feel authentic to me. It kind of felt a little forced, and the main character, who lost half of her soul, kept flip-flopping back and forth between 1 second she's like, oh, I don't really feel anything because I have half a soul, and it's like, I'm indifferent, and then the next second she's like, she has like these emotions, and she's saying how she does have these feelings, and how I don't understand why I feel this. I don't know. It just kept going back and forth. It wasn't that good. The male lead character, he's like some magician who's kind of a douchebag, and I couldn't do it. So it was getting to the point where I was like dreading picking it up. So I DNF'd it. And this book on Goodreads has a 4.2 star rating with over 8,000 reviews. So a lot of people liked it, but for me, I couldn't do it. Okay, so let's get into the books that I actually did finish in the month of August. I'm going to go from least favorite to my favorite. The first book, which I gave a 2-star rating. Let me preface this by saying this is a Christmas book. I don't think I've mentioned this before on my channel, but I love Christmas romance books. Like, it's bad when probably just after Thanksgiving or just around Thanksgiving is when I start binging like all the Christmas romance books. And so I've been requesting a lot of them on NetGalley, and this book is a NetGalley ARC that I received, and it is called Let It Snow by Beth Moran, and I did not like it at all. I'm actually surprised I finished it. So this book is about a woman who is a weather girl, and she is going home for Christmas because she hasn't been home in a really long time, and she is in a relationship with this man who was a student at a school that her parents run. It's like a school for, I guess, kids that have behavioral issues, and he went there, and that's how they met, and then years later they always had like an on and off relationship. And then also, back at home, there is a guy that she didn't go to this school for bad children or whatever. He went to the regular school that she went to, and she always looked at him as like this big nerd. So of course, you kind of see where this is going. It had a lot of potential, but the book actually centered more around her and this weather girl job position that she was trying to get from this billionaire who was doing like these weird interviews where you had to do all these like challenges, and it just wasn't, it was boring, and I didn't like it. And when I do my like Christmas romance rom-com book recommendation video, this will not be on there, so 2 stars. The next book that I read was Gallows Hall by Darcy Coates. This is, I think, my 3rd book by this author, and I gave it 3 stars. Like, her books are just, they're good, and I finished them, but they're all very, very slow, and sometimes it's like a drag to get through. This particular book, this is a new book by her. This is also a NetGalley ARC that I received as well. And overall, I enjoyed it, but it just, her books are a very slow burn. So, and they're long. Like, this one was, I feel like it was over 400 pages. And this one centers around, I was going to say patient. I'm sorry, that's nurse. Can't remember her name. So this book centers around Margot, who is coming back home. I feel like most of the books that I've read by Darcy Coates are about a woman who goes back home after her parents die or some relative dies and wants her to, and they leave like the house to them, this big creepy house to the main character. So Margot goes back home. She actually has not been home in, I think, like over 10 years. Her parents basically shipped her away to go live with another family member, and so they've passed away, and she goes home, and they own a winery. So Gallows Hill is a winery, and it was actually made on the ground where a bunch of people were like hanged many years ago. So there's all these like creepy things happening, and you kind of, the story unfolds, and you find out like why this winery is like spooky and why the town doesn't necessarily like to be anywhere near it. And once it got going and you get to like the creepy parts, and in the winery there's like these spooky areas, and you find out like the reason behind what's happening at this winery, all the haunting and everything. It was very good. I think out of the 3 that I've read so far, this is probably my favorite. But again, it was just very long-winded, and it's a slow burn. So if you like those slow burn, like haunting houses, in this case a winery, vibes, then you'll love it. I think this is probably a perfect time to read it, if that sounds interesting to you. For me, it was a 3-star. This is another arc. I didn't realize I had so many arcs that I read in August. The next one is Suburban Hell by Maureen Kilmer. This was fun. This book was fun. It centers around 4 friends that are just suburban moms, but they're not like the bougie, like PTA, stuck-up moms. They're more like the ones that are out in their backyard drinking wine, where their kids are all running around acting crazy. And in this book, the 4 friends are hanging out, and one of the friends decides that she wants to take the shed behind her house and make it into a she shed, and so that they have a place to come together, no kids, no husbands, drink wine, hang out and have fun. And when she starts kind of building this she shed, when they all come together and kind of christen the ground that is going to be where it's built at. A demon basically possesses one of the friends, the woman that lives at this home, at the house. And then a whole bunch of like craziness happens. It's not super scary. I can't even remember anything significantly gruesome happening. The woman that's possessed does end up like physically harming, just like by putting like this like weird like symbol on each one of the friends. And so of course, I'm sorry, I don't remember any of their names. One of the friends is very adamant about helping her. It feels like before they realize that she's possessed, is very adamant about helping her, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to be there for her friend. There's like this backstory with her where her sister was a drug addict, so she has like this guilt of things that happen with her sister, so she doesn't want to abandon her friend. She really wants to be there and save her and try to figure out what's going on. And so she gets the other 2 friends involved, and it goes from there. It's a fun read. I definitely recommend it. Again, I think it's perfect for this time of year. It takes place kind of, I want to say, over the course of like summer break, and then it ends like right around Halloween time or just after Halloween. So it's kind of cool to watch that transition. And it was a good book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, I recommend it. It came out last month or early September. we're in September, so either late August or early September, so it is available, and I do recommend it. It gave me My Best Friend's Exorcism vibes. Not as good as that, and definitely it didn't have any gruesome parts in it at all. It's a very like humorous horror demon possession book. It's not super heavy on the horror if you're not interested in that. So I do recommend checking that book out if you're in the mood to read some kind of like funny humor, horror type vibes about a bunch of housewives. So the next book that I want to talk about is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. She's actually the author of In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which I have not read yet. It's actually on my cart over here. I just haven't read it yet. But I kept seeing this book all over Bookstagram, and everyone was saying how they couldn't put it down, and my library had a copy of it. Libby had a copy of it, so I read it and I couldn't put it down. I really couldn't. I didn't love it, I think, as much as everyone else did. This was also a 3.5 star book for me. The content is very heavy. Everyone says that. There's a lot of abuse towards women, and there's a cult in it. I think that's probably why I didn't like it as much as everyone else. If you've watched any of my other videos about any books that I've read that have cults in it, I don't like cults. I get like irritated when I read about those. So that's kind of part of it, but the main part of the story is a woman. I'm sorry, I don't remember anyone's names in these books. It was in August. It's almost October, so I can't remember characters' names, but the main character, she has moved away from her hometown where she was friends with these two other girls and a guy. I don't remember his name. And she's moved away. One of the friends actually died back, I think it was college or the end of high school. I can't remember. So the main character here is that one of her friends have died recently, and her male friend who also runs, or male friend from college also runs a true crime podcast. So that's how she hears about this. So she decides to go back and try to figure out what happened, because she feels like I think it's being claimed as suicide, but she feels like that's not the case. So she goes back, tries to investigate what's going on, and the story goes from there. I went into this completely blind. That's why I didn't even know it was about a cult, but that's not a spoiler because it is in the description. But again, there's a lot of trigger warnings in this, a lot of brutality towards women. The cult leader is just sickening, and it's dark. It's not the darkest thing I've ever read. I was going into it the way people were talking about it, thinking it was going to be like this super like unbelievably disturbing, brutal book. And there are some like mild moments, but it's not, to me, it wasn't what I expected. But overall, it's a very fast-paced book. I did get through it, I want to say, in like 2 days, but just not as good as everyone else seems to think of it. So I gave it 3.5 stars. So I have 3 more books to talk about. The first one is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemison. I was terrified to read this book. If you've watched any of my TBRs when I used to do the Spin the Wheel, this was one of the books on my 22 books of 2022 that I really wanted to get to, and it got picked for August. So I finally read it, and all of the dread that I had to read this book was for nothing, because I did understand it. It didn't go over my head. This book is a very well-loved fantasy sci-fi book and has won a Hugo Award, and I think actually the whole entire series won a Hugo Award. It is very hard to describe what it's about, so I will try. Even just reading the back of this, trying to figure out how to... I'm not even going to try to summarize this. I'm going to say this. I think N.K. Jemison's writing is fantastic. It's very unique, and it does take a little bit of getting used to. There are, I think, 3 points of view in this book, one of which is told in second person. So if you don't like that, then you may struggle with that. So the writing was great. The pacing was good. The characterization itself was good. There's great representation in this book. I just did not like the world. I feel bad because I know a lot of people really like this book, but I just didn't really like the world building. I didn't like the magic, I guess you could say magic system in it. It's like earth magic. There's a lot of like just like earthquakes and stuff with like floating obelisks, and I don't know, I didn't personally enjoy it. I'm actually surprised I didn't DNF it. I can see overall why people love this book and find it a masterpiece. I think the ending had like a really cool twist to it, and it explained to me kind of why I didn't like the 3 characters that much. It definitely it made sense to me at the end why I didn't like them that much, but overall I can appreciate it. I do recommend reading it if you are a sci-fi fantasy reader. It's just because it's so unique, but for me, I didn't really like it that much. So I gave it like, I'm gonna say 3.5 stars, just because, yeah, I appreciate it for what it was, but I am definitely not going to continue with the series. There are some triggers in this, like child abuse, so just be aware of that. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about this one. The next book that I read was Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, and this is a sci-fi, like fantasy book. It's a chunker, and I enjoyed it. Overall, I really did enjoy this book. It is very long. I'm just going to say up front, I don't feel like it needed to be as long as it was. That's kind of the main negative I would say about it. I think Christopher Rocchio's writing is fantastic. He has a very poetic way of writing, so much so that if it's overused, it becomes a little too much, which is kind of what happened in this book. But this book centers around Hadrian. This book is a sci-fi space opera, which I love, and it takes place in this world with a bunch of different planets, and there's aliens, and Hadrian lives on this planet with his father, who is kind of, I guess you could call him nobility, and he thinks he's just going to inherit, he's the heir, that he'll be next, I guess, in command, and his father has other plans for him. His father's actually a jerk. His father wants him to go off and be, I can't remember the word of what it is, basically like a torturer, essentially. And he wants no parts of that. He actually wants to go off and be a scholar and explore the world. And yeah, so he doesn't want to follow the plan that his dad has for him. So he ends up getting out of that. And I think one of my favorite scenes in this book is how he gets out of that, and the trip to, once he gets off world and he's like en route to his next destination, the characters and the talk of this time travel and how time passes, a lot of time passes when you're traveling. Like, I loved all that. That was so cool, but it's such a small part of the story. You didn't really stay with that part very long. And then he ends up in this other world, and he essentially becomes like homeless, like a slave. And then he progresses. Oh my gosh. So I'm jumping ahead of myself. So Hadrian is basically telling his story in this book. He is known for wiping out pretty much an entire alien race. He's known for destroying the sun, which also destroys billions of people. And some people look at him as a hero. Some people look at him like as the most evil person in the world. And he starts his story from the very beginning when he, is young and home with his dad and his brother. And it goes from there. And it's a great, great story. I had a wonderful time reading it. It took me a while to get through because it is very long, and the writing is very, I don't want to say fluffy, but almost dense to a point. So it took me a little bit. There's also a bunch of new words, and everything to learn in this too. But I am really, really excited to continue on with this and see where this world leads to. It just has everything that I love about space operas, with the aliens and the planets and the time travel, and not time travel, but space travel. And it was a good time. It was a great time. There is a novella in between this book and the second book that I started, which is from his brother's point of view, which I've already loved. And it also kind of makes you feel like, is Hadrian a trustworthy narrator? Because you kind of get a different perspective in that book. But overall, I definitely recommend checking this out. The author is very much involved in the community. I hear wonderful things about him. check out, if you're into, I was going to say Discworld. What is it called? Discord. If you are into Discords, which I think I'm just too old for it. Or it's just my brain, or I'm just shy and don't know how to post on them. So I lurk sometimes, but I don't really use them that much. But there is a Discord that is doing a readathon for this book. I think I'm not sure how far ahead they are, but it's a great place to jump in. The author sometimes hangs out over there. It's called the Grimoire Discord, and I will post a link below. It is hosted, or I don't know, hosted by, managed by. It's managed by, we'll go with that, by Tall Guy Reads, Theo from Rekindled Reader, and RJ Reads, and they're great guys. So check out their channels as well, but highly recommend this book. It's great. It was great. And the last book that I want to talk about that I read in August was my favorite read of August, and that is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, which is a standalone in the First Law world. I did read the First Law trilogy and absolutely loved it. This is grim dark fantasy, and it was great. It was so, so good. I enjoyed this book so much, except for the ending. Or not necessarily the ending, the last part of it. So, like I said, this book is part of the First Law world. Joe Abercrombie is known for his grim dark writing. I personally love that subgenre of fantasy so much. I love morally gray characters. I love when characters are killed off. I love just brutal battle scenes and gore and all of that. It is like my favorite, and he does it so, so well. And I ultimately gave this book 4.5 stars. The only reason I did not give it 5 stars is because the last part of it dragged on so much, and it was almost like reading a completely different book. From the prologue, from the first like 10-15 pages of this book, you jump off into it and you are just submerged in this world, and there's action immediately, and it pretty much continues through most of the book except for the last part, which kind of like, I was like, what is happening? Why is this taking so long? So it is about Manza, who is a mercenary, and she is like the shit, basically. She takes care of her duke's assignments, and she is perfect at her job. And then in the very beginning of this book, she is basically backstabbed, and she is out for revenge. And she is no joke when she is going out for her revenge. She collects this group of like ragtag people, one of which is he's a character from the First Law trilogy who I think in this book he is hilarious. The thing about Joe Abercrombie, which is one of my favorite things when reading his books, is even though it's like grim dark and it's violent, he throws in bits of humor in it that literally make me laugh out loud. And I love it so much. And it's not like corny. I don't think it's like corny humor. It's just well placed. It's funny. And I mean, most of these tabs are like just parts of where he just had me laughing out loud. So you're going through Manza's journey with getting revenge with this crew of people that she's following. She doesn't really trust anyone. She's just a hardcore, gritty female lead character, and I enjoyed this book so much. I highly recommend, if you like grimdark fantasy, please check out Joe Abercrombie's books. Start with the First Law trilogy first. I can't wait to continue on. There's 2 more standalones that I need to get through before I get to his last trilogy, which was the most recent books. So highly recommend. I don't want to go too much into what this is about, but it was so good. So 4.5 star readings. This was a buddy read with Jordan. She didn't like it as much as I did, but we had fun going back and forth about some parts in this book. So I definitely, like I said, look forward to reading more from Joe Abercrombie. So that's all I read in August. I'm super late with this wrap up, but I definitely wanted to talk about these books because Some of them were great and some of them were not so great. So as always, thank you guys so much for stopping by. I appreciate it. I love spending time with you in the comments. So please let me know if you've read any of these books and what your opinions are, or if you're looking forward to reading some of them that I've mentioned, or even the books that I DNF'd. Did you like them? Let me know. I'd love to discuss. So I will see you guys again next time. See ya.